Mike McConnell, about 8 minutes after 10 o'clock. I have a guest standing by here. A study was released yesterday by the Centers for Disease Control having to do with sexual violence in America. And try as I might, I tried to find the questions that were asked and how the questions were posed in this survey, and didn't have a lot of luck. Although in the course of looking for those, it's interesting to look around the world, and this is in every major newspaper in every country on the globe, where in America, 1 in 5 women will have been raped in the course of her lifetime. So it comes down in many cases to how the question is asked, what the definitions are, and to that end, I want to talk to Christina Sommers, Christina Hoff Sommers. Has written a few books in her day, including Who Stole Feminism, How Women Have Betrayed Women. And you consider yourself, first of all, Christina, good to have you. How are you?
Fine.
Good.
Nice to be here.
You betcha. And you do consider yourself a feminist, just not perhaps a victimized feminist.
Right. A feminist who likes men and cares about reality-based research, not paranoid theories about the capitalist heteropatriarchy.
So to get into the meat of this, do you have a copy of the questions, the survey questions as they were asked?
Yes, I do.
Give me some idea of how broad the definition might be of what would constitute rape under this particular study.
Well, one of the things that they did to generate high numbers is that you must, if you ask people, were you raped or were you somehow sexually violated, you tend to get low numbers if people can define it themselves. So they didn't do that. They sort of described sexual situations and then asked if that happened to you. Now, one of the questions was this one. When you were drunk, high, drugged, or passed out and unable to consent, how many people have had sex with you? And a lot of women said that had happened. They've been now the question is, what does that mean? It can mean you were passed out, but it can also mean, the question also says, were you drunk, or were you high, or were you drugged? Many people would listen to that question and think, yes, I have had sex while I was drunk. And so in 2010, almost 1 million women were identified as having had sex under these conditions. And so it looks like an epidemic of rape when, in fact, you should know they came up with about 1.3 million victims of rape last year. The Bureau of Justice Statistics puts the number at 169,000, the FBI 84,000. So this is vastly higher than official crime statistics because they use these kinds of questions. But it gets worse. They then wanted to show how many people were just victimized in other ways besides rape, but other kinds of sexual violence. And here's the question. Participants were asked if they've ever had sex because someone pressured them by telling you lies, making promises about the future that they knew were untrue.
Really?
Now,
I mean, I hear these things, and I can't believe the number's not higher than 1 in 5. In all honesty, I'm not being a wise guy.
I know.
That number should be higher than 1 in 5.
I think that has a man or a woman, for that matter, actually they find that the thing about this study, they made the mistake of asking men these questions too. So it's not only 1 in 3 women that are stalked or raped or attacked. It's also 1 in 4 men. So it just looks like the United States is just a cauldron of sexual violence.
So the problem's actually worse for men than it is for women?
No, it's worse for women, but not.
1 in 5 women and 1 in 4 men?
Yeah.
That would make it worse for men. That's 25%.
No.
Versus 20.
That was a different statistic. That what they say is that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men will be victims of either rape, stalking, or coercion. So they try to get the numbers up by these odd combinations.
Well, coercion. I mean, that's fairly all-encompassing, be it a man or a woman who's doing the coercing.
Then they say, any women or man, have you ever consented to sex because a suitor wore you down by, quote, repeatedly asking or showing they were unhappy? Now, again, this is insane. How could the CDC have possibly thought this was a serious question? And yet they did it. They did this. It's the worst case of advocacy. I won't say the worst case. That's an overstatement. But it's one of the worst cases of advocacy research I've seen, and I've seen a lot of it.
Well, but some part of a government organization, the CDC, yes or no, they are?
Oh, yeah.
A governmental entity. I mean, and it's not like it's not done in a lot of other areas, too. My take on this is obviously you have people in positions where it's their job to define problems and solve them, and if they start running out of problems, they're going to have a bigger problem. So we have to almost create problems.
Right, and a sensational finding, it's a sure way to garner publicity and headlines.
Right.
There also may have been political pressure on the CDC to come up with dramatic findings, because in the press release, Secretary Sebelius says that the information collected in this survey will serve as a vital tool for the administration's effort to combat domestic violence and sexual abuse, and it underscores our commitment to combating violence. And then there's a link to the White House webpage. So there's a political motive. I suspect there's a third reason. I think that researchers sometimes think that even if it is a fallacy-ridden piece of research, that it's going to help people, because what could be the harm by exaggerating a problem? At least it brings attention to a real problem.
Well, it minimizes a true rape.
Of course, and I think these phony studies are very destructive. They lead to faulty solutions. This kind of sensationalism and crying wolf is going to undermine the credibility of the CDC. The CDC has a good name. When I hear it, that it did a study, I take it seriously. But that will change if they continue to do studies of this sort.
I mean, I would guess if a woman had sex when she was drunk, there's a real good chance he was too. So were they both raped?
That's what I'm wondering. And according to this study, I would think that a lot of sexual intercourse throughout human history and in the world today counts as rape. And then if you add in the sexual violence of someone telling you lies, telling you you're beautiful, or in order to sleep with you, then this and they say that these problems lead to that they do the standard thing that people do when they lie with statistics. They overstate the problem, and then they take the worst case and they talk about how it leads to suicides and various diseases, because it's the Centers for Disease Control, even gastrointestinal disorders. I mean, the whole thing is absurd. Anyone that looks at this study, but, it's hard to get. You have to go on the Internet and order this thing. So you depend on the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post to report it. But the journalists don't seem to go into they take it at face value.
Well, they did, because I really was looking all over this morning for some of the questions, and obviously if you find the questions, you're going to find somebody who's debunking the study like you, and I honestly did not find one, including anything by you. But every newspaper around the globe reported this statistic that in America, 1 in 5 women get raped.
Right. Fortunately, there's one organization. I'm at the American Enterprise Institute. It's not
right.
my organization, but it's called SAVE, S-A-V-E, SaveServices.org, and they are trying to fight this kind of faulty research. And
how did they define stalking? I'm kind of curious.
Well, that was interesting.
An unwanted phone call?
Yeah, and also sending flowers and cards and so forth when you don't want them.
Really?
Yeah. This is on page. Let me find this. I have the whole. It's a 20, 30, 50, 100-page study.
I'll tell you what. Let me work in a few questions. A quick break, then a few questions, and you can maybe get that info together, because to me it's kind of mind-boggling that the government engages in situations like this. Now, the study was done for the CDC by the National Intimate Partner. Is this an organization of their own, or did the CDC do this themselves?
Well, it was supervised by the CDC, and then they brought in, and it was just a massive effort, because they interviewed 26,000 people. They were phone interviews. I mean, that's a whole other story. Calling people up on the phone.
Yeah.
And they only had a 26% response rate. Most people didn't want to do it. Who would want to do it?
Well,
it's probably people with a story to tell.
I read the whole survey went 25 minutes. After 25 minutes on the phone, I'm tired of answering questions, too. A quick break if I can. Christina, Hoff, Sommers, what's your website or whatever you got?
AEI.org, American Enterprise Institute, AEI.
Great. Hold on if you would. This is 720 WG. Please. Mike McKyle talking with my friend here, Christina Hoff Sommers, for a few more minutes on the CDC's survey on sexual violence and rape in America and how they came to determine what qualifies as a rape. If you're just tuning in, part of what the CDC covers here is that... did I just hang up on her? No, I hit the wrong line. Christina, you're there, aren't you? Yes. When the sun comes in this window, you can't see what's lit and what's not on these buttons. Anyway, that's my problem. Just getting people up to speed on this, that if, in fact, you engaged in sex when you were drunk, according to the CDC, that qualifies as rape. Did you find anything else on stalking?
Yes. Okay, they asked how many people have ever, and then they have, and some of the questions do sound like creepy behavior, like watched or followed you from a distance or spied on you. But then it says, left you unwanted messages, made unwanted phone calls. All right, that can be creepy, but it depends on the number. Sent you unwanted emails, instant messages, left you cards, flowers, or presents when they knew you didn't want them. Sent you unwanted messages, sent messages through websites like MySpace or Facebook. Now, again, some of this is genuinely stalking, and some of it is just annoying behavior. And they ask you, if it's ever happened in your life, so it could be 8th graders. I mean, it could have happened when you were in 8th grade.
Yeah. Well, it also could happen in the course of a breakup. He wants to get back with you. She wants to get back together. You don't want to have anything to do with them. And that might be somewhat common in any breakup.
This is it. We just don't know. And that's why criminologists know that it's very, very tricky to do this kind of research. You need very skilled statisticians. The Bureau of Justice Statistics sets the gold standard with their National Crime Victims Survey, and it's a state-of-the-art survey, but they come up with vastly lower figures than the CDC. And I just think it's so cynical that the CDC would disregard it and then go with headlines, these sensational findings that have just no bearing on the truth. It's
if you think it's politically motivated, what's the motivation? It's funding? It's what?
There's a lot of funding involved through the Violence Against Women Act for all sorts of agencies, and the CDC. Different programs depend if you get the public worried about a problem. Then that you draw more attention, more headlines, more journalists, more stories, more money, and it's a very cynical way to get support. But I do suspect people have some good intentions too. They think, well, it's a real problem, so I exaggerate. I'm sure people at the CDC thought that. They think, all right, this research is bogus, but at least it'll draw up problems to the serious problems of sexual violence. But as I said,
I think we have enough problems out there for them to tackle.
I agree.
Without manufacturing more.
You don't need to lie about sexual violence. You don't need to lie and overstate, exaggerate about rape and so forth. The reality is bad enough, but that is simply not the way it goes, and this is a fashion now in many, many areas. As you're right, it's not only in the area of crime, but almost every social problem.
Sure.
You'll have an advocacy group that overstates it. But here's what's different. This is the CDC. This is the Centers for Disease Control. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear their name, I have good associations. I think of it as a very serious. And I'm very, very alarmed to find that its research has been politicized. I didn't know that. I mean, it may have happened long before now.
Yeah.
But it has become politicized, and we're going to have to take what they say with a grain of salt until this is corrected.
A question that's on and off the subject. The phrase human trafficking has become quite common in the past few years, and I saw recently where a pimp, as we used to call them, was charged with human trafficking. When I first heard human trafficking, I'm thinking a tractor trailer full of illegal aliens coming over the border, or women being kidnapped and forced into some form of sexual bondage.
Yes.
Do we know what encompasses human trafficking?
No, because again, it's another area where they're involved in enlarging the definition of the word to encompass prostitution in general, and it's very misleading because, as you say, we think of it as a kind of a form of human sexual slavery where these people are there against their will, and now they're calling people who might not necessarily be there against their will as being trafficked. And so it dilutes the problem, it diverts resources away from good solutions, and creates, I think, cynicism in the public.
Sure.
Just think, after a while, you're not going to believe anything you read about these problems when there are real problems, as you say.
I get more and more cynical all the time. Listen, I'm going to have to run, but Christina Hoff Sommers, thanks for your hard work, and good to have the background on this, and we'll see how much other coverage it gets as to what the questions were. But AEI.org is your website, correct?
Yeah, American Enterprise Institute, AEI, and there are lots of scholars there on all sorts of topics. It's a very good place for college students to go to get the other side of the story.
Get the scoop.
The liberal bias they may get in their classrooms.
All right, Christina, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll
Bye-bye.
see you now. You betcha. Mike McConnell, 1037.